Science pushes humanity forward, but sometimes progress demands a terrible price. Fact 1. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo wanted to answer a simple question. What happens when you put good people in an evil place? Does the environment corrupt us? He recruited 24 healthy college students, all screened to ensure they had no violent tendencies or mental health issues. He divided them randomly into prisoners and guards. Then he built a realistic fake prison in Stanford University's basement, complete with barred cells, uniforms, and strict rules. It was planned to last 2 weeks. It didn't make it to day 6. The transformation was instantaneous and horrifying. The guards, given power and anonymity behind mirrored sunglasses, became sadistic with breathtaking speed. They didn't just enforce rules, they invented new humiliations. They forced prisoners to clean toilets with their bare hands, stripped them naked during inspections, and weaponized sleep deprivation to break their spirits. Some guards worked extra shifts, not because they were paid, but because they enjoyed the power. The prisoners broke fast. One student had a complete emotional collapse within 36 hours, screaming, crying uncontrollably, convinced he was losing his mind. But here's the disturbing part. Zimbardo, acting as prison superintendent, was so caught up in the experiment that he initially refused to let him leave. He had become part of the madness himself. This experiment proved a terrifying psychological truth. Under the right conditions, anyone, including you, can become a monster. The thin line between civilization and savagery isn't a fortified wall. It's barely a suggestion, easily crossed when authority gives permission and anonymity provides cover. Fact 2. Project MKUltra. Imagine waking up and not knowing who you are, where you've been, or why your memories feel like they belong to someone else entirely. Your sense of self completely shattered. During the Cold War, the CIA feared the Soviets had mastered mind control techniques. Their response wasn't defensive, it was to become the very thing they feared. Enter Project MKUltra, one of the most disturbing chapters in American intelligence history. For over 20 years, from the early 1950s through the 1970s, the US government conducted illegal experiments on its own citizens without any form of consent or knowledge. They used massive doses of LSD, prolonged sensory deprivation, hypnosis, electroshock therapy, and various forms of psychological torture. They deliberately targeted the most vulnerable members of society. Prisoners who couldn't refuse participation, mental patients who couldn't report what was happening, and even completely unsuspecting people at bars and social gatherings. In one sub-project called Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA set up safe houses in San Francisco and New York. They hired sex workers to lure men back to these apartments, where they were secretly dosed with LSD while CIA agents watched through one-way mirrors. They weren't looking for a cure or defense. They were looking for a way to break the human psyche and rebuild it as a weapon. Many victims never recovered. Their lives were shattered, their minds permanently fractured. When the project was finally exposed in the 1970s, the CIA destroyed most of the records. We may never know the full extent of the horrors committed in the name of national security. Fact 3. The Monster Study. We often think of experiments as something done to adults who could potentially consent to participate. But in 1939, Wendell Johnson at the University of Iowa decided to experiment on those who had absolutely no voice or legal protection. Orphaned children with no one to protect them. Johnson had a theory that stuttering was entirely learned, not biological. To prove it, he took 22 orphans' children, already vulnerable, and abandoned. Half were given positive speech therapy, praised warmly for every word they spoke. The other half, they were subjected to systematic psychological abuse disguised as therapy. Every time they made even a tiny mistake, they were told they were stutterers destined to fail. They were told their speech was disgusting and that they should never speak unless perfect. The results were devastating. The children in the negative group didn't just start stuttering, they became withdrawn, anxious, and terrified to speak at all. Many suffered from speech impediments and psychological trauma for the rest of their lives, damage that followed them into adulthood. They were normal children systematically broken by a man they were supposed to trust. It was dubbed the Monster Study by Johnson's own peers, who were horrified that he would use innocent children as sacrificial lambs. These stories are disturbing, deeply uncomfortable, and genuinely hard to hear, but they're critically important to remember. If you're finding this deep dive into the dark side of science valuable, hit that subscribe button. We're only halfway through, and the next experiments are even more shocking. Let's continue. Fact 4, Unit 731. If there is a hell on Earth, it was located in Pingfang, China, during World War II. Unit 731 was a secret biological and chemical warfare research unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. Here, human beings weren't called humans, they were marauta, meaning logs, just pieces of wood to be used and discarded. The atrocities committed here are almost too horrific to speak of. Prisoners were subjected to vivisection, live dissection, without anesthesia. Scientists wanted to see how the human body reacted to diseases like plague, anthrax, and cholera. While victims were still conscious, they performed pressure chamber tests to see how much a human could endure before their eyes literally popped out. They tested frostbite by freezing limbs and hitting them with hammers to see if they would shatter like glass. Pregnant women were infected with syphilis to study transmission to their unborn children. Over 10,000 people died in these nightmarish experiments. Perhaps the most disgusting part isn't just what happened during the war, but after. The US government gave Unit 731 leaders complete immunity from war crimes in exchange for their research data. The knowledge gained from these horrors was bought with blood, and the killers walked free. Fact 5. The Milgram experiment. After the horrors of World War II, the world asked, how could so many ordinary people just follow orders? In 1961, Stanley Milgram set out to find the answer. He told participants they were part of a learning experiment. One person was the teacher, and the other, secretly an actor, was the learner. Every time the learner got a question wrong, the teacher was instructed to give them an electric shock. With each mistake, the voltage increased. As the shocks got higher, the learner would scream in agony, bang on the wall, beg to be released, and eventually go silent, suggesting unconsciousness or death. When participants hesitated, a man in a lab coat, the authority figure, would calmly say, "The experiment requires that you continue." No threats, just an authority figure giving permission. Shockingly, 65% of participants went all the way to the maximum 450-volt shock, clearly marked as lethal. They weren't sadists. They were sweating, trembling, and stuttering in visible distress. But they did it anyway. Why? Because an authority figure told them to. This experiment revealed the most uncomfortable truth. Most of us are only one order away from committing an atrocity. Fact 6. The case of David Reimer. In 1966, a baby boy named Bruce Reimer suffered a tragic botched circumcision. Desperate, his parents turned to Dr. John Money, a psychologist who believed gender was entirely a social construct. He convinced them to raise Bruce as a girl named Brenda through surgery and hormones. Dr. Money used the Reimer family as a living laboratory to prove his theories. He forced Brenda and her twin brother into disturbing, inappropriate sexualized therapy sessions. He published papers claiming the transition was a complete success, becoming a celebrity in the scientific world. But it was all a lie. Brenda was miserable every single day. She felt like a boy, acted like a boy, and was bullied relentlessly. At age 14, after finally being told the truth, she immediately transitioned back to being David. But the damage was irreversible. The trauma of being a scientific experiment followed David and his brother until both eventually took their own lives. A life destroyed not for health, but for one man's academic ego. History shows what happens when we forget humanity in pursuit of knowledge. These experiments teach us that science without ethics isn't genuine progress. It's just cruelty with a clipboard. Fact 7. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. In 1932, the United States government promised free healthcare to 600 black men in Alabama. They were poor sharecroppers. Most had never seen a doctor. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, a local term for various ailments. It was a lie. The U.S. Public Health Service was running an experiment. They wanted to observe what happens when syphilis goes untreated, to watch the disease destroy the human body from the inside out. 399 of these men already had syphilis. They were never told. They were never treated. In 1947, penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis, safe, effective, and widely available. The researchers didn't give it to the men. Instead, they convinced local doctors not to treat them. When some men were drafted into the military and their syphilis was discovered, the researchers had them removed from service, not to save them, but to continue the experiment. For 40 years, these men suffered. They went blind. They went insane. Their organs failed. By the time a whistleblower leaked the story to the press in 1972, 28 men had died directly from syphilis, 100 more from related complications. 40 of their wives had been infected and 19 children were born with the disease. The men thought their government was helping them. Instead, they were treated like laboratory rats, expendable, disposable, less than human. This wasn't done by Nazi Germany. This was done by the United States Public Health Service. Subscribe to Egg Talks, stay curious, stay critical, and above all, stay human.